Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Today is the 1st of October, and with that, China joining the reserve currency. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next hours and days regarding the effect that will have with the currencies, and if it might have knock-on effects further for Deutsche Bank. Time will tell. Anyway, I want to go on to a story that's come out through the Wall Street Journal titled, "The US signed a secret document to lift UN sanctions on Iranian banks. Administration backed measures on the same day Tehran released 4 American citizens from prison." This was released on the 29th of September, yesterday. Washington. The Obama administration agreed to back the lifting of United sanctions on 2 Iranian state banks, blacklisted from financing Iran's ballistic missile program, on the same day in January that Tehran released 4 American citizens from prison. According to the US, officials and congressional staff briefed on the deliberations. The UN sanctions on the 2 banks weren't initially to be lifted until 2023 under a landmark nuclear agreement between Iran and world powers that went into effect on January the 16th. The UN Secretary Council's delisting of the 2 banks, Bank SEPA and Bank SEPA International, were part of a package of tightly scripted agreements. The others were a controversial prisoner swap and transfer of $1.7 billion in cash to Iran that were finalized between the US and Iran on January the 17th, the day the Americans were freed. The new details of the delisting have emerged after administration officials briefed lawmakers earlier this month on the US decision. According to the senior US officials and senior State Department official Brett McGurk, and a representative of the Iranian government signed 3 documents in Geneva on the morning of January the 17th. One document committed the US to dropping criminal charges against 21 Iranian nationals, and Tehran releasing the Americans imprisoned in Iran. Another committed the US to immediately transfer $400 million in cash to the Iranian regime and arranged the delivery within weeks of 2 subsequent cash payments totaling $1.3 billion to settle a decades-old legal dispute over failed arms deal. So what I'm going to be building up a little story on today is about this banking system that's going to be opened. So this was based on the 29th, yesterday, September, whereas a couple of days prior to that, via this Sputnik News, on the 26th of September, Iran's central bank allows issue of credit cards for first time. The Central Bank of Iran allowed the country's financial institutions to issue credit cards for the first time in Iran's history. However, the cards are unlikely to be issued soon. Local ISNA news agency reported, citing the central bank head, Valiola Saif. According to the ISNA, the cards will be issued with credit limits of $3,000, $10,000 and $15,000. It will be possible to use them both for the purchase in stores and online. It would be wrong to think that these cards will be quickly adopted by the banking network. The credit cards are set to be issued in the number dependent on applications received by the bank. The central bank's decision comes after, in January, the European Union and United Nations, and particularly the United States, lifted their sanctions against the Islamic Republic after the International Atomic Agency verified Tehran's compliance with the nuclear agreement reached in January 2015. The lifting of the sanctions cleared the way for Iran to bolster its oil production and economy. So you can see how these two stories now tie hand in hand with each other. So with the lifting of these sanctions and a huge bribe effectively sent in cash to Iran, And as part of the negotiation deal as well, that Iran laid out sanctions released so they can issue their own form of credit. Now obviously this credit is going to be backed via IMF outlets, and it all becomes an extension of the Western debt system. So this brings me on to a bit of research that I decided to do on debt, because we all know what debt does to society, people, and the knock-on effects of that, because everybody's become blasé to debt, thinking it's a normal thing to be in, whereas we understand it as it's the worst thing to be in. So let's just take a quick look. We have the population of Iran. Now obviously this is all estimated figures, but just take it as ballpark numbers for everything that I'm going to provide you with now. So we're looking at 77.45 million, call it 77.5 million people. So just bear that in mind. And now I'm going to be basing this on a comparison between the United States and Iran's potential future, and you'll understand what I mean shortly. So as we know, the American population is in the region of 320 million. So we use those two figures shortly. Another article from the Wall Street Journal, May the 20th, 2016. Balance due. Credit card debt nears $1 trillion as banks push plastic. So as we know, banks are trying to extend credit and loans and all sorts of things to consumers. Okay? So what does that actually mean? Well, based upon credit card ownership in the United States, 7 in 10 Americans have at least one credit card. And it breaks it down into a 2014 study. And I was unable to find the actual exact figures, but as I say, take this all as just a ballpark figure. So 30% of people don't have a credit card, which leaves 70%. 33% have between 1 and 2, and 20% have between 3 and 4. 10% have 5 to 6. This is 5 to 6 credit cards. 10% of 320 million people is 32 million people with 5 to 6 credit cards. So the average card holding in the United States as of 2014 is 2.6 cards for the 320 million people. So that is over 700 million credit cards in America. So let's take a further look at debts per household. Now this is per $1 billion, okay? And revolving debt, outstanding revolving debt, means debt that isn't paid at the end of the month statement, and it rolls over to the next month's statement. And bear in mind the factor of unpaid debt creates interest, and with the interest creates compounded interest. So from 2010 on unpaid debt, month to month, it increases and increases and increases. So as of March 2016, it was 952 billion. But as via the report here, a month later in May, it now reaches 1 trillion. So we're now at 1 trillion. And obviously you need to break that down per card. I won't do the maths on that, I'll just trust these numbers are sufficient enough. So it's telling us the average indebted household credit card debt as of 2016 has now hit $16,000. So, so the average indebted household, if we just take the typical family, a man and his wife and 2 children, as the average household. So between the man and the wife, or the man and the man, or the wife and the wife, gotta love the genders, and you take that as 5.2 cards between the 2 of them, totaling $16,000. So if we take the $16,000 per household and divide it by the 5.2 cards, each card has an average of $3,000 of debt. Okay? We can then move on. Now, is that just an average number to set the base credit limit on the first card of $3,000? I think not. They will have tier groups based upon the likelihood that people will cap various limits. Now, obviously, 3,000 at the moment in the United States is the average amount per card. So, what a great introductory balance to release for the first-time credit carders in Iran. So, let's go over to this next article, which again is showing the average credit card $15,500, $16,000 per household. So, it's close enough. The average mortgage in America is $172,000. Auto loans are huge in America, and quite likely that could be a big factor for Iran, not to mention the student loans that we know all about. So let's just take a quick look at credit card debt. Now obviously this figure is massively different to the Wall Street Journal claiming 1 trillion. This is 280 billion shy of that number. So this is obviously, so one of them is obviously very, very wrong. We can look at auto loans in the States have created 1.1 trillion in consumer debt. And every time that's not paid back, it compounds. So this is a number that is just going to rise and rise and indebt its people that have taken out those loans. The same goes with the credit card loans. Sure, you might have 0% interest, you might have special deals, you might get air miles, you might get bonuses out of them, but that's all carrots dangled in front of your eyes to make you take on this debt, to put you into a position of becoming blasé about it. Thinking debt is okay, it's manageable, it's sustainable, we can cope. I just have to make the minimum payments. Student loans, 1.26 trillion. So guys, it all starts off with a credit card, and then it goes into an auto loan, and then you get all the student loans with people trying to educate themselves to get higher paying jobs, which aren't actually even available. So between the span of these three, that's creating over 3 trillion in extra debt. And that is what made me do this quick story. Because if you've got 3 trillion based upon 300 million odd people, then what's going to happen with 70% of Iran's population? Now if you divide the 77 million people into the 70%, that's almost 54 million people. If their buying habits become the same United States, then that is effectively saying they could be looking at producing over 100 million new credit cards. And with that, and if we divide the 320 million American people into 77 million, you're looking at 25% of the same debt figures for the States. So if you're talking about $3 billion in debt on a compound interest, you're talking about generating $750 billion just by the issue of credit cards. And that's based upon the limit of $3,000 being the average in debt. And obviously I don't know the political setup inside of Iran, as in who their banks are linked to, whether they're internally supported by their own debt system or whether the debt is being created via a Western source like the IMF, via MasterCard and Visa and all those sort of places. I would take a presumption that it is. Nonetheless, the point of this video is to show that there's going to be a huge extra injection of debt into the system, which only expands the derivative markets and how they tie up all this debt into effectively Deutsche Bank, because they are the underwriters for a lot of the debt. But this is really just to raise it to your attention so you can see what this actually means. On a numbers scale, you're talking about injecting $1 trillion of extra debt into a nation, into its people. And remember the old saying, let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws. Mayer Rothschild. And another one, gold is money, everything else is credit. JP Morgan, 1912. So guys, thanks so much for watching, and so please do leave your comments. I'd like to hear what your take is on this. Thanks for watching.